Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about sensory overresponsivity. What is sensory overresponsivity? Well, I'm glad you asked. Sensory overresponsivity refers to an exaggerated, automatic, heightened, and perpetuated response to normal sensory stimuli. It's most often noted to occur in response to tactile, auditory, and visual stimuli. This could be fabric textures, sticky materials, lights, sirens, or alarms. It also may result in negative emotional responses and certain sensory avoiding behaviors. So this could be seen as certain individuals try to avoid certain stimuli in certain environments because they don't want to experience the overwhelming sensory response. It's been observed in people with autism spectrum disorder and certain mood disorders. As far as the biological/neurological basis for SOR, it could be a result of differences that interfere with the transmission of information from unimodal to multimodal sensory brain regions, but also could mess with the transfer of information between certain brain hemispheres. For those with ASD, there could be a decreased feed-forward inhibition and altered GABA function, and that may give us a clue into the source of SOR symptoms. It also could be due to some lower neuronal thresholds that suggest one's nervous system requires a little less stimulation to fire, and it suggests an over-responsive nervous system. So for those who have a low threshold, they're considered sensory sensitive. It could also indicate a failure to habituate to stimulus. So the McKernan ETL 2019 study looked at brain responses using fMRI imaging, and the extent to blood oxygen levels and sensory cortices, the amygdala and the insula, were correlated to the severity of certain SOR symptoms in those who had ASD. Furthermore, it's seen that people who are typically developing and for those who have ASD, they both adapt and habituate to certain stimuli, but those who are typically developing habituate to stimuli quicker. As far as the developmental/social basis for SOR symptoms could be due to a general maturational delay, or people with certain lower socioeconomic statuses also report having a higher level of SOR symptoms. So those who screen positive for SOR also have a history of internalizing behaviors as toddlers, and the relationship between internalizing problems and SOR carries on through adulthood as well. So here is just a little example of a child who has SOR symptoms, and just pay close attention to how he reacts when the adults touch him.
Many babies are irritable or fussy because they misinterpret sensory signals.
That's nice. Can you brush your arm? Yeah, brush mom's head. You do not want me to touch you. Okay, I won't touch you. I promise. Look, and then we're gonna open. Come get Winnie. Come get Winnie.
Ah, that poor child, I know, right? So as you could see in that video, he was so overwhelmed by any stimuli that was coming his way, such as being brushed on the side of his arm or being thrown into a ball pit. And that's the reality of people who have SOR. They just can't handle the sensations they're feeling, and it's very debilitating. So SOR is seen in people who have autism spectrum disorder, and the latest version of the DSM includes hypersensitivity to sensory stimuli as one of the diagnostic criteria for ASD, but SOR is not quite a diagnosis in itself yet. For people who have ASD, there's many avoidance behaviors seen, such as avoiding tactile, auditory, gustatory, and visual stimuli. And there's a little bit of a theoretical speculation on the correlation between SOR symptoms and autistic traits. The first model is the primary SOR model. It states that ASD produces SOR, which then produces anxiety. This is based off of a classical conditioning learning model, and SOR is seen to create a heightened stress response to sensory stimuli that could lead to states of anxiety due to the constant pairing of negative stimuli. And this could be developing certain phobias to balloons because of the overwhelming pop sound. And this theory has been shown support for many longitudinal studies that have looked at the correlation between the two. So in this model, they would argue that SOR comes before anxiety. The second model is a primary anxiety model. This argues that ASD is associated with increased anxiety due to a state of hypervigilance as part of a response to stress. Individuals with anxiety may lose the ability to regulate their attention, and they may have poor attentional control. So those with anxiety are more likely to orient their attention to threats and therefore experience SOR symptoms. This hypothesis is not supported by the Amos ETL study and many previous research as well, because that study found a strong correlation between autistic traits and SOR separate from stress anxiety. So it's not very much not supported that anxiety comes before SOR. So adults who have ASD tend to experience loneliness and sensory avoiding behaviors because the SOR symptoms in children persist into adulthood. So feelings of loneliness may be increased due to these SOR symptoms and may negatively affect how the individual interacts with his or her environment. There seems to be some sensory avoiding behaviors that are correlated with feelings of anxiety and loneliness, and high rates of loneliness tend to increase anxiety. So loneliness kind of interacts as a little mediator there. So adults who are more sensitive to environmental stimuli in a social context may experience that social isolation as they avoid certain social events where they will be overwhelmed. So there has been some cases of children who have anxiety but not ASD who experience some SOR symptoms. The Cornelia, Carter, and Freeman 2014 study found a high rate of SOR symptoms in children who were seeking anxiety and OCD treatment, but did not have ASD. However, we're not really sure how conclusive these results can be and how valid they can be because SR could not be completely independent from anxiety, and there could be a lack of solid operational definitions of SOR versus anxiety. There tends to be some overlapping diagnostic criteria. So I think if we solidified the diagnostic criteria a little more, we could for sure know whether or not SOR was happening to these people in these children who are seeking anxiety treatment. Also, children are more likely to seek help if they have multiple conditions rather than one, and a lot of these ratings were done by parents. So they more likely could have just wanted to get treatment for their children by saying the child had multiple things. As far as the parent-offspring transmission of SOR goes, there tends to be a strong correlation between SOR symptoms and internalizing behavior problems in typically developing children. And they're likely formed by genetic elements. So depression that begins in mothers before children are born may be related to internalizing and SOR symptoms. Furthermore, paternal depression is connected to both offspring internalizing and SOR symptoms. So in this case, since there is a strong correlation between internalizing behaviors and SOR, that could indicate a case for the primary anxiety model. Furthermore, the Huel ETAL 2019 study examined the idea that SOR is caused by anxiety. Both mother's psychopathology and father's psychopathology predicted offspring's SOR symptoms, but the mother and father's SOR symptoms did not predict the offspring's SOR symptoms. So it's seen that the psychopathology and internalizing symptoms were passed on to offspring, but it didn't really mean that they're going to produce the SOR symptoms. This could be seen as anxious parents often ignore their child's anxious cues, which could lead to increased anxiety into the child and lead to hypersensitivity to certain stimuli. This hasn't really been supported by other studies yet, so we're still trying to figure out which of the two models between the primary SOR and primary anxiety model really creates SOR and if SOR can be a diagnosis within itself separate from ASD. So there is some treatment for SOR in children who have ASD. It's often treated using sensory integration techniques that provide vestibular and somatosensory input in an attempt to produce adaptive responses over time. So they integrate all the senses together so that they won't be so overwhelmed by the stimuli. So I'll just show you a little bit of this right now.
The chance to catch themselves and balance where they might in the world around them fall off the swing.
Setting up an environment in which the child is learning in a very fun way about their body scheme, how to act on the environment, and also to be successful and enjoy both staying still and moving and engaging in play.
And there's a lot of fun equipment, and it's by design. We use the
All right, so that's the end of that video.
The chance to
So, thank you all for watching today. If you have any questions, feel free to comment down below and I will answer those questions as soon as possible. All right, I hope you all have a good rest of your day.